All right, Book of Judges, chapter 11. All right, chapter 11 begins the story of Jephthah. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a harlot. Mom was a prostitute, so he's a lowborn. He doesn't even have a father, doesn't know who his dad is. But he's really good at fighting. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they thrust Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not inherit in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then fled from his brothers and dwelt in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went raiding with him. So you could make a living as a bandit back in the day. And that is who Jephthah is. However, God is going to call Jephthah to liberate Israel from its enemies. And in verse 29, chapter 1, verse 29, we'll resume. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. All right, so Jephthah is going to battle under God's direction, and because he's obeying God and following God's direction, Jephthah is having success in his victories. Now in verse 30, Jephthah does something very rash, and it's a pagan practice, and it goes against the Torah. Verse 30, and Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whoever comes forth from the doors of my house to meet me, when I return from the Ammonites, shall be the Lord's, and I will offer him up for a burnt offering." You're not supposed to do a human sacrifice, Jephthah. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand, and he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities as far as Abel Keramim, with a very great slaughter. So the Ammonites were subdued before the sons of Israel. Okay, so Jephthah makes this rash vow, says, "I'll offer up as a burnt offering the first person who runs out." He's assuming he's probably going to be some slave, someone he doesn't really care about, coming out to greet him. And what should Jephthah do? Jephthah should renounce this vow, all right? If you make a vow to God to do something that's evil, that is not a morally binding vow. When you make a vow to God, they typically are binding, and that's something you have to take very seriously, all right? You do not break a vow lightly. But if you're vowing to do evil to God, it's de facto null and void, and you don't have to follow it. So Jephthah should not do what he's about to do. But he's not the greatest judge, morally speaking, in Israel, so he doesn't know that. Verse 34, then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and with dances. She was his only child. Beside her, he had neither son nor daughter. And when he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow." Actually, you could, but that's all right. Verse 36, and he said to him, "My father, if you have opened your mouth to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone forth from your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites." And she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Let me alone 2 months, that I may go and wander the mountains and bewail my virginity, I and my companions." And he said, "Go." And he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and bewailed her virginity upon the mountains. And at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow which he had made. She had never known a man. And it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in the year. All right, so taking it at face value, this guy kills his daughter. He gives her 2 months to go mourn her virginity. And now it becomes like an annual tradition in the land of Israel at the time to like go and remember Jephthah's daughter. There is one Pharisee. So the Pharisees, this is a Jewish interpretation of this story. There's one interpretation that what Jephthah does, because there's a specific reference to mourning the virginity of the daughter, what Jephthah does is that he offers her to the tabernacle at Shiloh, right? Just like you remember we read about, there's the women who minister to the temple, and they're like the temple virgins. So there's one Jewish interpretation that like looks at Jephthah charitably and interprets, there's a principle of scripture that you interpret the patriarchs and the judges and the people in the most charitable light that you can. And that would certainly be the most charitable light, that his daughter just went and became a consecrated virgin at the temple, and that was her being offered up to the Lord. Or he killed her. The most common interpretation is that he offers her as a sacrifice. But I'm just throwing that out there as like to keep you guys aware and on your toes, like, oh, there's multiple ways and multiple meanings that stories can have. And none of them are always like 100% concrete. We don't know for sure. All right, chapter 12 details intertribal fighting. The Israelites are fighting amongst themselves. Highlight this and make a big fat note, deterioration. Okay, so you have in your study guide an essay prompt. How does Judges show that Israel's a nation in deterioration? This is very important, chapter 12. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire." And Jephthah said to them, "I and my people had a great feud with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not deliver me from their hand. And when I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" Then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim. And the men of Gilead struck Ephraim because they said, "You are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh." And the Gileadites took the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, "Let me go over," the men of Gilead said to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" When he said no, they said to him, "Then say Sheb-boleth." And he said, "Siboleth," for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slew him at the fords of the Jordan. And there fell at that time 42,000 of the Ephraimites. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in the city in Gilead. So the test for if an Ephraimite was crossing over the Jordan, they'd say Shibboleth, and the Ephraimites say Sibboleth. All right, because that's how dialects work, right? When you speak a language in a certain area, another area starts saying the language in a completely different way. Okay, so like there's down south they're called pecans. Up here they're called pecans. All right, so if you want to know where someone's from, you can ask them like, "What would you like to drink with your hamburger?" They might say, "I'd like a soda," or "I'd like a Coke," or "I'd like pop." And based on their answer, you know where in the country they're born and raised and where they learned how to speak. The Midwest is really where they say pop. So they do this like vocab test to see, are you actually an Ephraimite? Because if you're talking like an Ephraimite, then you're clearly the enemy that we're annoyed with and we're going to kill you. So intertribal fighting, the nation of Israel is fighting against itself. That is not good. Little civil wars are breaking out. Aside from all the paganism and being conquered, now this deterioration is happening. So jump ahead to chapter 13. And we begin the story of Samson, who is a major prophet. Jephthah is major. Yeah. Chapter 13. And the sons of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Surprise. And the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. And there was a certain man of Zorah, of the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Behold, you are barren and have no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore beware, and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean, for behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from birth. And he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. So Samson's a Nazarite from birth. What do? How do you begin the Nazarite vow? What's the first thing you do?
Circumcision?
No, close. No. Does involve shaving. You shave your head. Okay, so first thing you do is you get a haircut, and that's how you enter into the vow. Then the vow lasts until you then shave your head again. All right, so Samson from birth, he's a Nazarite, so he can't have any grapes, he can't touch anything dead, and then he can't go near anything unclean. And he can't get his hair cut because he's a permanent Nazarite. Let's jump ahead to verse 24, chapter 13, verse 24. And the woman bore a son and called his name Samson. And the boy grew up, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Menahadan between Zorah and Eshtaol. So the name Samson means of the sun. Samson, him of the sun. And by sun, I mean S-U-N, the big thing in the sky. Chapter 14. Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. There he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, Is there not a woman among all the daughters of your kinsmen, or among all our people, that you must go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So before we continue with the story, this is not Delilah, by the way. Okay, so chapter 14, 15, and 16, Samson goes for 3 different gals. All right, so chapter 14, it's this Philistine girl. Chapter 15, it's another gal. Chapter 16 is when you get to Delilah. Verse 5, Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and he came to the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion asunder as one tears a kid. And he had nothing in his hand, but he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a while he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. He scraped it out into his hands and went on eating as he went. And he came to his father and mother and gave some to them, and they ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the carcass of the lion. What's the significance of doing that?
He's a Nazarite, so he's not supposed to touch things that are dead.
Yeah, he's not supposed to touch dead things. Okay, so going after a pagan gal. Although the author says it's actually God's will. He's going to use this as an occasion against the Philistines. Going after touching dead things. Taking honey out of their bellies. Kind of a weird story, but, yes. Sure. Verse 10, And his father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there, for so the young men used to do. And when the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 festal garments. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 festal garments. And they said to him, Put your riddle that we may hear it. And he said to them, Out of the eater comes something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. And they could not in 3 days tell what the riddle was. On the fourth day, they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. That escalated quickly. Verse 6, have you invited us here to impoverish us? Verse 16, and Samson's wife wept before him and said, you only hate me. You do not love me. You have put a riddle to my countrymen, and you have not told me what it is. And he said to her, behold, I have not told my father or my mother, and shall I tell you? She wept before him the 7 days that their feast lasted, and on the seventh day he told her, because she pressed him hard. Then she told the riddle to her countrymen, and the men of the city said to him on the seventh day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 men of the town, and took their spoil and gave the festal garments to those who had told the riddle. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. So he's really mad at his wife for telling the vow, so he gives her off to his best friend, says, you go be go be her wife, his wife. All right, so chapter 15, Samson's heartbroken. After a while, at the time of the wheat harvest, Pentecost. Okay, Pentecost is what's at the wheat harvest. This is the Passover. One of the two. I will go into my wife in the chamber, but her father would not allow him to go in. And her father said, I really thought that you'd utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistines when I do them mischief. So Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches, and he turned them tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and burned up the shocks and the standing grain as well as the olive orchards. Then the Philistines said, who has done this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. And Samson said to them, if this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged upon you, and after that I will quit. And he struck them hip and thigh with great slaughter, and he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? They said, we have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he did to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. And they said to him, we have come down to bind you that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not fall upon me yourselves. They said to him, no, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And the ropes which were on his arms became as flax that had caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and put out his hand and seized it, and with it he slew 1,000 men. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, have I slain 1,000 men. All right, so you can make a little reminder there. That's bad. You should not be touching dead things, Samson. Yeah.
The one man slaying 1,000 though.
Yeah, there it is again. So, right, remember the Samson's not good, but why is Samson righteous? Like, he fails in a lot of areas, but where does Samson not fail?
He always gives it to the Lord. He's always saying
He's monotheist, okay? Yeah, so that's like what we were talking about in Deuteronomy. When you talk about following all the laws, what's the core law you have to follow? It's monotheism. You can't fall into paganism. All these other offenses, they're forgivable. Verse 17, when he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand, and that place was called Ramath Lehi. And he was very thirsty, and he called on the Lord and said, you have granted this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? And God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and there came water from it, and when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore the name of it was called En-Hakkore. It is at Lehi to this day, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Chapter 16, Samson and Delilah. So, remember, Samson, his name means of the sun. Delilah, her name in Hebrew means of the night. So you have the interplay of the day and the night in this story. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a harlot, and he went into her. The Gazites were told, Samson has come here, and they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning, then we will kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose, and he took hold of the doors of the gate of the city, and the two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and he put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is before Hebron. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came to her and said to her, entice him, and see wherein his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to subdue him, and we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. And Delilah said to Samson, please tell me wherein your great strength lies, and how you might be bound, that one could subdue you. Okay, so most people know the story of Samson and Delilah, so I'll just briefly summarize it if you're unfamiliar with it. Delilah keeps pressing Samson to tell the secret, and Samson, at first he makes up things. The first night he tells her, if I'm bound with a single thread, I'll lose my strength. He wakes up and he's bound with a single thread. Think that would be a red flag for this relationship, but no, he breaks it and he hangs out with Delilah again. Second night, tells her, if 7, I think it's 7, locks of my hair are weaved into a loom, my strength will vanish from me. He wakes up, and what do you know? 7 of his hairs are weaved into a loom. Again, second red flag. But, maybe Samson is more brawn than brains. Okay, and so finally, Delilah just keeps emotionally and manipulating Samson until he gives in and says, if you cut my hair, I'm a Nazarite. That'll end my Nazarite, lifestyle and vow, and I'll lose my strength. Okay, let's resume at chapter 16, verse 16. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his mind and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I be shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his mind, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up this once, for he has told me all his mind. Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. She made him sleep upon her knees, and she called the man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out at the other times and shake myself free. And he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze fetters, and he ground at the mill in the prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Let's jump ahead to verse 28. So Samson's hair begins to grow back. He is blinded, he's humiliated, and then he's brought out to a party in the temple of Baal to be mocked and derided as a conquered enemy of Israel, as a conquered enemy of the Israelite God Yahweh. And Samson makes one last plea to God. Yes, Mary? Yeah. Verse 20, then Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I beg you, and strengthen me. I beg you only this once, O God, that I may be avenged upon the Philistines for one of my 2 eyes. And Samson grasped the middle pillars upon which the house rested, and he leaned his weight upon them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he bowed with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon the people that were in it. So the dead whom he slew at his death were more than those whom he had slain during his life. Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had judged Israel 20 years. Chapter 17, Micah and the Levite. This is another key example of erosion in the land of Israel, deterioration as a nation. This is an example of religious chaos. So the intertribal fighting was an example of political chaos, okay? Civil war chaos. Chapter 17 is an example of religious chaos and the nation falling apart. There was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver which were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, and also spoke it in my ears, behold, the silver is with me. I took it. And his mother said, blessed be my son by the Lord. Okay, that's weird. So the story begins with, Mom, I remember you were really upset because 1,100 pieces of silver were taken, and you cursed the guy, but I did it. Your loving son, one who stole your money. And the mom's reaction isn't, you're grounded. I mean, he's probably told to be grounded, right? They also don't ground in the ancient world. They just beat you. But they say, she utters this blessing, right? Bizarre parenting. Verse 3, and he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, I consecrate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son to make a graven image and a molten image. Now, therefore, I will restore it to you. So when he restored the money to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into a graven image and a molten image, and it was in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and teraphim, and he installed one of his sons who became his priest. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. So verse 6, we're going to see that line repeated. Highlight it every time we see it. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And we'll talk about the significance about that towards the end of the book. But this is religious chaos, okay? That's not how you're supposed to worship. That is liturgical abuse. It happened back in the Old Testament. It happened in the 300s. It happened in the 1500s, and it happens today, okay? So, don't be surprised or don't think you're being stuck up if you see something weird happening at a mass, for example, or you hear about some dissension and some new, split off from the church. That has always been part of human history, okay? It happens then. It happens today. It was a problem then. It's a problem today. Verse 7. Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed from the town of Bethlehem in Judah to live where he could find a place. And as he journeyed, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. And Micah said to him, from where do you come? And he said to him, I'm a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to sojourn where I may find a place. And Micah said to him, stay with me, and be to me a father and a priest. And I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, and a suit of apparel, and your living. All right, so Levites, they're supposed to do religious things. You come be like my personal household priest for this silver idol. And Levite says, yeah, all right, 10 pieces of silver a year. It's a good living. I'll take that. Thanks. Verse 11, and the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons, and Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and was in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, now I know that but Yahweh will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest. I don't think this guy was super well catechized and read Deuteronomy, right? Okay, so clear lack of catechesis, this clear religious confusion, mixing of offices. Not all Levites are priests, right? Only the sons of Aaron are priests. Chapter 18, Micah gets caught up in the migration of Dan, but in verse 1 we're reminded, in those days there was no king in Israel. So highlight that again. The author is going to keep repeating this again and again to remind us, and he's detailing more and more of the chaos that's breaking out in the nation. So this is an example of territorial chaos. So Dan, as a tribe, they had conquered an area under Joshua and they had an allotment. But then they don't want the allotment anymore, so they want to go up north and conquer new territories up north and do a migration. Okay, so even like the geographic boundaries that are pre-established are being unstable. The family inheritances are becoming unstable. Yes, ma'am.
Is the author repeating the phrase because it's saying there's no God in Israel? Because God is the king?
Yes. But it's also like setting you up for Saul and David as well. But yeah, the spiritual interpretation is that Israel has abandoned God at this point. So thanks for spoiling it. All right, verse 29, chapter 18, verse 29. The Danites, they move way up north, and they named the city Dan after the name of Dan, their ancestor, who was born to Israel. But the name of the city was Laish at the first. And the Danites set up the graven image for themselves. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses, oh boy, and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up Micah's graven image, which he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. All right, so Micah, he gets caught up with the Danites in their migration. They get his idol. They go up. Moses' grandkids or great grandkids are now offering incense to this idol. Total chaos. Verse 19. We're reminded again. In those days, there was no king in Israel. So chapter 19 begins a story that shows moral degradation. All right, we're going to read some horrific things that happen in chapter 19. And there's also going to be another civil war. So chapter 19 details moral degradation, deterioration of the nation, and results in civil war. In those days, there was no king in Israel. A certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine became angry with him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys. And he came to her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet them. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. And on the 4th day they rose early in the morning, and he prepared to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you may go." So the two men sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, "Be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry." And when the man rose up to go, his father-in-law urged him, till he lodged there again. And on the 5th day he rose early in the morning to depart. And the girl's father said, "Strengthen your heart, and tarry until the day declines." So they ate, both of them. And when the man and his concubine and his servant rose up to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Behold, now the day has waned toward evening. Please tarry all night. Behold, the day draws to its close. Lodge here, and let your heart be merry. And tomorrow you shall arise early in the morning for your journey and go home." But the man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him. When they were near Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." And his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who do not belong to the sons of Israel, we will pass on to Gibeah. And he said to his servant, Come and let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah. So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. And they turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. And he went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no man took them into his house to spend the night. And behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah, and the men of the place were Benjaminites. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the wayfarer in the open square of the city. And the old man said, Where are you going, and from where do you come? And he said to him, We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to my home, and nobody takes me into his house. We have straw and food for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and your maidservant and the young man with your servants. There is no lack of anything. And the old man said, Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square. All right, when was the last time we saw a warning that, hey, you really don't want to spend the night out in the streets here? It was in Sodom and Gomorrah. So he brought him into his house and fed the donkeys and washed their feet and ate and drank. Verse 22. You can make a note. This is a repeat of Sodom and Gomorrah. And they were making their hearts merry. Behold, the men of the city, base fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, No, my brethren, do not act so wickedly, seeing that this man has come into my house. Do not do this vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Ravish them and do with them what seems good to you. But against this man, do not do so vile a thing. But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and pushed her out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was till it was light. Verse 27. And her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the door of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, Get up, time to go. But there was no answer. Then he put her upon the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his home. And when he entered his house, he took a knife, and laying hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day of the sons of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. Yeah, Old Testament's violent. Chapter 20. Then all the sons of Israel came from Dan to Beersheba. That's from the north to the south. So Dan, remember the Danites, they migrate to the north. So when you say from Dan to Beersheba, you're talking the whole territory, everybody in between north and south, assembled, including the land of Gilead. And the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. And the chiefs of the people of all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot, and drew the sword. Now the Benjaminites heard that the sons of Israel had gone to Mizpah, and the sons of Israel said, Tell us, how was this wickedness brought to pass? And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, I came to Gibeah, that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. And the men of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house by night, and they meant to kill me. And they ravished my concubine, and she is dead. Okay, so this Levite, he cuts his wife up into 12 pieces, sends her to the 12 tribes with a letter, and this is going to lead to a civil war. We'll conclude Judges and begin Ruth tomorrow.